one of the key things that I really want to understand is, what does it mean to experience being a self? What does that really mean? It's very easy to give a trite answer to that and say, yeah, well, I'm Anil, and that's what it is to be me. I have a set of memories, and that's me, right? I am the thing that does the perceiving of the world around me. But the view that I'm moving to, and not just me, a lot of others, is that the self is not the thing that does the perceiving. The self is another perception. So the experience of me is generated on the fly in exactly the same way that the experience of the bowl of grapes on the table between us is generated. And part of the experience of self is what in the world is my body. I'm putting my arm out in front right now, and I naturally experience this as part of me rather than not part of me. But just because it's so intuitive doesn't mean there's nothing to explain there. And for instance, there are people with various neurological conditions who don't experience their limbs as being theirs, or who experience the converse, who experience somebody else's limb as being theirs, which is a particularly weird one, called somatoparaphrenia, where people extend their sense of body ownership onto others. Very odd.
I've got that.
But no, people will do all sorts of weird things to try to make sense of these odd experiences. And more prosaically, we can use virtual reality to model some of these experiences in an experimentally controllable way. We can give people virtual arms, we can change the properties of these arms, how they relate to what they do, and then we can start to see under what conditions people experience the limbs as being theirs. And if the limb makes an action, for instance, do they experience it as their action or as not their action? So we can begin to pick apart different ways in which we always construct our experience of selfhood.
Whoa. Because that has an interesting parallel in some scriptural doctrine that the self is a construct, that we are the experiencer, but that they are invited in some meditative practices that I use to continue to recede to a point of, you talked about oblivion elsewhere, that to a point of where is the exact interface between nothingness and somethingness?
Yeah.
And I'm very interested from a number of perspectives, really, of like the way that we construct ourselves. Like you said, if memory is extracted, who are we? If sensory experience is extracted, who are we? And where do you get that information that the self is a construct in the same way that sensory information, such as the apparently external world, is constructed? How do you measure that?
Well, we can measure it in the lab in a number of ways, but just to step back for a second, I think it really does align with a lot of insights from some of the spiritual traditions, especially those that emphasize the impermanence of the self. I'm thinking more of the Buddhist tradition here, and one of the unexpected pleasures of working on this stuff has been the interaction with people from the Buddhist tradition. Turns out there's quite a long history of Buddhist scholars coming together with neuroscientists to explore these sorts of common questions, and to look in particular at what the meditative state has to say about these conditions, because there are different kinds of oblivion. I think that there's the oblivion of general anesthesia, but there's also the ego dissolution that people report in some meditative states and also in some psychedelic states too, where it's not that there's a complete absence of experience in the same way there is under anesthesia, but the experience of the self within the sphere of experience is altered and changed and perhaps dissolved. And that, that's an empirical data point from subjective experience that the self is constructed. And that's, I think, an extremely important insight when we start to think, well, if it's constructed, how is it constructed? What are the brain circuits involved, and how do they explain the different aspects of what being a self is? And in just the same way, again, back to this analogy with life, just that if something's alive, there are many different properties a living system has. Being a self is not this unitary essence of soul. I mean, we've already talked about the body as being experience of the body as part of self, having memories as part of self-experiencing, actions as freely willed is another part of self. Having a first-person perspective is also a part of self. And all of these things can come apart in different ways. And we get into the territory a little bit of Oliver Sacks here in psychiatry. I mean, there's all these individual case studies and phenomena where individual parts of selfhood can splinter away while the rest are left. And these two are insights that being a self is constructed and it's compositional, many different things going on. And beginning to kind of unwrap that now with the other tools that we have from science to figure out, okay, how do we generate, explain, model these different ways of experiencing being a self? I think, for me anyway, personally, they probably deliver some of the same revelations that a long-term meditator might get. Now, I'm not claiming it's exactly the same. I haven't got the discipline to do meditation properly. I've tried it a few times, dabbled, but doesn't really respond to dabbling. But to have a kind of baked-in understanding of the constructed, compositional, and impermanent nature of self is the sort of understanding that I think you see convergence between many different traditions. And again, it's the kind of understanding that makes us feel more continuous with nature rather than separate from it.
That's cool, man. Thanks for watching this podcast and going all the way to the end of it. Would you so kind as to click the bell? It might not be there, over there. And subscribing so that we can infiltrate your serenity and peace of mind.